Good afternoon, all. Welcome to another RISSB MasterClass webinar. My name is Sudha. I'm the GM of Products at RISSB, and I'll be a host for this morning's webinar, this afternoon's webinar. And those of you who are from Perth and South Australia and NT, welcome and good morning to you. The presenter for this webinar is Klaus Clemens, and he will be presenting the white paper, Streamlining Rolling Stock Approvals. Now, before I proceed to introduce him, let me first take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet and live. For me, that's the Whadjuk people of the Greater Perth region. We acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. Welcome, everyone, for this webinar. Let me introduce Klaus. Klaus Clemens is a seasoned transport operations technology and safety professional with over 3 decades of experience. Klaus has carved out a distinguished career that spans from chemical industry to railway and transportation management. Throughout his career, Klaus has held various high-level positions, including Director of RMOS, where he provides transport and logistics consulting services. He has also served as an independent safety advisor and independent certifier for major Australian infrastructure projects such as Sydney Metro and Melbourne Metro Tunnel Project. Recognized for his expertise in railway systems, safety management, and risk assessment, Klaus has played crucial roles in developing safety management systems for railway design, construction, and operations. His unique blend of chemical engineering background and extensive experience in transportation has positioned him as a respected figure in Australia's transport and logistics sector. Welcome, Klaus. It's great to have you come and talk a little bit more about the paper that you have been working on and present some of the information from the paper. And before I hand over to Klaus, I'd like to highlight a couple of things from a RISSB perspective on where this paper came about. The railway industry has discussed the means of a centralized and harmonized rolling stock registration for several years now. Those conversations resulted in the development of a national rolling stock register in partnership with Commonwealth, state, and territory governments. The register will provide a single data source on rolling stock across Australia and a centralized platform for managing the rolling stock registration process. Once fully developed, it will enable the input of rolling stock identification information, provide railway infrastructure managers, rolling stock operators, and asset owners with functionality to update and access shared data. RISSB's approach at the beginning of the National Rolling Stock Register project was to develop a minimum viable product to collect maximum learning about customers' processes implemented across RSOs and RIM. And the minimum one was to provide really to capture all the data that is centrally available, all the rolling stock data into a central database. The project thus far has provided valuable learning. The white paper was initiated to understand the challenges and opportunities for the railway industry to streamline the rolling stock approval processes. And this will be the paper that Klaus will be talking about. I just want to take the opportunity to thank all the industry members and individuals who participated in the conversation with Klaus on engaging, providing data, providing information, and cooperating in pulling this information together. We just want to take this opportunity to thank the whole of industry who participated in this to input into this white paper. I'm going to pass it on to Klaus, but before I do, please remember to put your questions as we go through into the chat section, and we'll pick as many questions as possible. If we can't, we will come back to you at the end and touch base on the questions and maybe take them down and respond back to you at a later time. Please, as always, please be respectful, as I'm sure you would do in the comments that you provide in the chat section. Thanks, Klaus. Over to you.
Thanks, Sudha. I assume the PowerPoint's up, is it?
Yes, that's correct. We can see the PowerPoint.
Yep, all good?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, yeah. First thing I want to address is that this is a paper that's easily misunderstood. So the objective of this paper was to create a framework for further discussion, and also to inform and normalize a lot of the language around the topic, which was originally the registration of vehicles. It appears that it got expanded to include certification, but as I'll explain later, certification and registration are inseparable. They're the same topic. So what I'll cover is the actual rolling stock approval process from through the design process, the operational approvals, and then finally approval to use the rolling stock on the network. I'll talk about how co-regulation sits at the heart of how we're managing this currently, and how the rolling stock approval is basically engineering, operational, safety assurance processes in various guises. I spend a bit of time talking about the roles. It was a real eye-opener about how some of the roles in the generation of the registration and certification processes vary across the country. I was particularly surprised by the role of the owner in registration. And then I've conclude the presentation with the proposals that are in the report. So what is certification? Certification is an engineering assurance process for the design and construction and performance of the rail vehicle that's being constructed, or I should also highlight, is being imported. Then the registration is essentially a process, operational safety assurance process, which deals with the interface with infrastructure. And then just for completeness, which is outside the scope of the work, but just for completeness, then finally you have network approval of a train, which includes safety and efficiency assurances by the RIM and the RSO in operating a train as opposed to a vehicle. Yeah, just a moment. I'm not getting the screen I want here. Here we are. So what I'll explain is what are the key documents and the interfaces that the different roles have. And what I found was there's a wide variety. So a lot of the initial discussion was around the number of data fields and the amount of information a RIM may or may not require. And that range across Australia is from 25 data points through to 220. So there was a lot of diversity, and I think this was very telling of where we are as an industry in understanding the engineering and safety assurance processes that we may need to apply. So I had a lot of excellent discussions with the stakeholders, sometimes repeated discussions, because I kept finding questions and going back to people. And everyone was very generous in their time they provided, and a lot of people provided their internal documents, which I really appreciated. But this is where the first refinement of scope occurred. So I went to talk about registration, and everyone wanted to talk to me about certification. And they were saying, yes, registration is cumbersome and time-consuming, and there's no norm in the industry. There's great diversity in the questions and the data definitions, and all of that is true. But every stakeholder I met said, but certification was a bigger problem. It caused more delays. It was even more cumbersome, even more detailed, and depending on what RIM you went to, you had very different processes. So that's how certification became a topic within the topic of registration, the topic of the paper. The other thing that I quickly noticed was there are a lot of good practices going on. And you know, I had a look at the ARTC Equiper program used for rail vehicles, road rail vehicles, track machines, and really that stood out as being a really best practice as far as filing, capturing, documenting the paperwork that you need to to certify and register a vehicle in your system. So the good news for me was the NRSR project, the National Rolling Stock project, of course, is being developed by the same people who run Equiper, although they clearly have very different scopes and very different purposes. There really is no overlap between the two. Yep. So I talk a little bit about co-regulation, and you know, the reason I've put up this well-known cartoon, well-known in the railways in my time anyway, is, you know, the question to ask yourself is, depending if you're the RIM, the RSO, or the regulator, is, you know, are you the stork or are you the frog? And it really doesn't matter. The important message is, you know, co-regulation and the whole approach to regulating is something that we continue to struggle with, and I think it's a struggle that's well worthwhile.
Excuse me, Klaus, I'm going to interject a little bit. Some people are unable to see the slides. It seemed to change for me. I can see it, but some of the others aren't able to see it. Is there a way you can reshare it, or would you like us to run it from our end? Or look, I think people are able to see it. Yeah, just do a reshare, Klaus. Just do a reshare on that.
Yeah, I can do that. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. And then go into presentation mode and then reshare the screen. Yeah. Yep, if you just go into presentation mode now, that should.
How's that? Does it come back?
Yep, it's come back.
Okay, yeah, something did happen there, you're right. So all these engineering processes, engineering assurance processes, certification, registration, all are in the context of co-regulation. So accreditation is important, because accreditation is about the acceptance of the safety management system by the regulator. The reason I raise this as a topic is obviously the context of in which these registration is occurring, but also because it's co-regulation, I find, is even less understood than it was when it first started. Well, when I first came across it in '95, and I think back to those days when you know, the first regulator and the second regulator in Australia, Bill Casley and Darryl Burns, said to me, "Say what you do and do what you say." So, you know, that's quality 101, where I'd come from the automotive industry, which is, if it's important, you write it down, and you communicated it in procedures to the staff. So there was that principle is something that I think we should be hanging on to. The important thing about co-regulation is its aim is to leverage industry expertise while maintaining government oversight, fostering a system that's both safe and efficient. So neither efficiency or safety can be treated as separate topics, although clearly we sometimes fall into that trap, letting one take over from the other. That's not how the real world works, and that's not the way we should work, and that's not the way we've structured our industry. Yeah, so I'll talk some more about that. So as far as roles go, the surprise for me was the owner in some jurisdictions is able to certify and register a vehicle, which I found very interesting because a lot of people had told me that wasn't the case, but in fact it is the case. And there is a very large owner that has a lot of vehicles, and he told me he certainly does do that in some RIM, some very large RIMs. The rest of this, you expect to see the RSO and the RIMs being involved in all stages of the process. Of course, the AS 7501 allows for an ICP, independent competent person, to be involved. And that seems to me to provide a degree of efficiency and effectiveness that's not so much provided if the RIM doesn't allow for it. I thought the efficiencies gained by an owner being able to certify and register were also fairly significant without any detriment to safety. And then, of course, ONSA has the oversight of the safety management system, essentially, and is in a position to ask more questions of the activities and the management of risk.
Klaus, you mentioned a little bit about co-regulation earlier on the piece, and I'm just going to sort of draw some questions out as we go through. One of the questions I have is, what are the challenges and opportunities for rolling stock approval as a result of co-regulation? I mean, I'm assuming there are advantages and there are disadvantages. What is your viewpoint around co-regulation and related to rolling stock approvals? Yeah.
Yeah, at a very high level, I think we need to acknowledge that we work in a co-regulatory model. The RSOs and the RIMs are certified through their safety management systems by a third party, the regulator. They have distinct roles. They manage hazards and they share hazards with each other. That's the RSO and the RIM. And I think this was acknowledged, this was raised to me by the RSOs, that some RIMs behave like they're the regulator and not a party that was managing hazards on their side of the fence and sharing some hazards with the RSOs. And it was interesting for me to meet with particularly one RIM who acknowledged that they behave like a regulator. That's not right. I don't believe that's the purpose of co-regulation. I don't believe that's the correct role for a RIM, to see themselves as a regulator. Under the format of the Rail Safety Interface Agreement is very clear. Here are the hazards that I'm managing as a RSO. Here are the hazards I am managing as a RIM, and here are the hazards that we share, and one or other of us are going to lead on it, or we have joint responsibility for. That is the co-regulatory model, and I believe that is the correct model. So I think where a RIM assumes a high authority without owning the hazards that an RSO owns, I think is inefficient and unsafe. Definitely.
Thanks, Klaus.
Yeah.
And it's related to the other same question, and I guess this highlights the importance of defining the roles and responsibilities of the various parties involved. And you've called out ICP here, so not ICP, SIA, Safety Interface Agreements. Is that the right place to start defining some of those roles and responsibilities, and who manages risks with regards to registration of rolling stock?
I think its parent is back in the definition of your accreditation as an RSO or your accreditation as a RIM, and those definitions in your accreditation for what you're being accredited for should flow through to the Rail Safety Interface Agreements. I think if you're not doing that, you're selling yourself short, or you're over-claiming the hazards that you think you're managing, which you're not. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's it, Klaus. Thank you. I'll let you continue with the slides, and I'll jump back in a bit later.
Yeah. So there seems to be definitely an opportunity, and I made some recommendations around self-certification, although that might be a bit more read into. There's a bit of a nuance in that, and I'll talk about that later. So that was all about context. So the next couple of slides, I'll try and build the story up so you can actually see on one page the process that is good practice at the moment in Australia. Not applied universally, but there are pockets of good practice. So I don't know if can you see my cursor here at all, Sudha? No? Yes? Anyway, we've got the safety management systems from the two organisations, the RIM and the RSO. Then you've got the engineering safety assurance, the RIM safety assurance, which is really operational safety assurance. And then you've got the next level. This is really infrastructure operations interface. And the one on the far right is pure operational safety, that is traffic management. So the topic of the paper is vehicle certification and vehicle registration, which are these two in here. And I've included network approval to show the complete story to get you through to being provided a route, which of course is the purpose of these processes, besides the safety and engineering assurances. The business purpose is to provide a route for an RSO to run a train. So the three blocks that we're interested in, well, we're really interested in these two blocks here, which are the vehicle certification and the vehicle registration. So what are those two processes and how do they relate back to our safety management systems that we've both been accredited for? So at the top level, there's a RIM safety risk policy and an RSO safety policy informing an engineering safety assurance process, which is called up in the regulations, a requirement for the safety management system. Now, the scope of that depends on the activities of the RIM and the RSO. My observation is some of these processes are a bit thin based on the procedures that I was provided. You could also argue, and certainly the RSOs argue, that the RIM engineering safety assurance processes are in some cases completely onerous and far exceed the role of a RIM. And as I said, some RIMs acknowledge that. So the other things that influence these vehicle certification and vehicle registration assurance processes are your commercial rail access agreements, your rail safety interface agreements, and so what I've tried to do here is explain in the context of all these agreements, all this regulatory oversight of your safety management systems, your internal governance over your safety management performance required by the Act, by the RIM and the RSO. You know, and remembering that your safety management system as an accredited, your accredited safety management system under the terms of the Rail Safety Act, Rail Safety National Law, sorry, are in effect a regulation under the Act. So what I've got here is basically a little summary in one page of all the regulations that go. This is taking the Rail Safety National Law at its face value. These are all the regulations that apply, or you can be called up by the regulator to address any shortcomings in vehicle certification or vehicle registration. So I really don't see any need for any further regulation as far as the scope of these activities goes. What is required is clarification of the roles and clarification of the scope of what is actually being certified and what is being registered. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. I think I'll leave it there.
Just a quick one, Klaus, as you're explaining, I mean, you have taken sort of a complex process and diagrammatically try to explain that. In real life, do you find that this is the columns are exactly how it is? Are there overlaps in the real world of registration? And yeah, what's your observation in these areas? Yeah.
Well, I was told very clearly by one regulator that we don't do certification, we only do registration.
You mean RIM?
A RIM telling me that they don't do certification, they only do registration. In fact, what they were doing, and they acknowledged that after we discussed it further, is they were relying on the adjoining RIM's certification process to mutually recognise that certification.
Okay.
So that would be an example of what I would say was needed more of in the industry. There should be no need we have separate certification processes, and where there is a need, they're by exception rather than the rule. Yeah.
Is it fair to say then, by displaying this way, that you could have theoretically have a vehicle or set of rolling stock certified, approved, but may not be allowed on the network because of performance issues or congestion for network approval of train within a RIM? Or there could be other.
Absolutely. No, I think there were two ideas that came to my head, and it was interesting that when I went back through the history of regulation or co-regulation, that they were there at the beginning, which is that there's a safety aspect and an efficiency aspect. So if I start at vehicle certification, that is just pure safety, engineering, assurance process. And when I get up to the route provided to the RSO, as I move towards the right, it becomes increasingly an efficiency issue. So when I get to network approval of a train, the assumption is the vehicle is safe for our network. Now, all I'm really concerned about is how will it perform on my network? Can I manage it through my network? They are efficiency issues much more than they are safety issues. There are safety issues, but essentially they're taken for granted. They're accepted that the vehicle is safe. In the same way, when I buy a new truck or a new car, I don't look at the ADR plate and think, is this car compliant for Australian roads? I assume it is compliant for Australian roads. And I'm looking at its functional use, or if you like, efficiency for the tasks I want to do. So as you move from left to right, you move more into the efficiency space and further away from the safety space.
Thanks, Klaus. Appreciate that.
So what were the RIM differences that I found? Essentially, they're very, very, very diverse. You had extraordinarily well-documented requirements for engineering assurance, extremely well-documented operational assurance documents. And then at the other end of the scale, you had practically nothing. So this is my second point, which is the RIM requirements vary from 24 to 172 data fields for registration. That tells you the whole story about the whole country. So there is no norm here. There is no. So if you argue there are 172 data fields for registration are too much, then I would argue that 24 is not sufficient either. Now, if you talk to the 172 data RIM, that's a very risk-averse organisations or group of organisations, in fact, that have very well-developed engineering assurance processes. So no surprise, and they've had the time and the money to document their requirements. So no surprise they have 172 data fields to meet. If we go to the other end of the scale, I think they're somewhat reflective of our organisations before we had co-regulation, which was I had a lot of control. I had a lot of uniformity in the types of vehicles. I didn't have so many vehicles coming from other operators. That world's gone. You know, there's a great diversity of vehicles coming into the network. There's a great diversity of operators, and I've got a couple of slides explaining that. Yeah, so there was a great diversity in the acceptance of who could certify. So I'm quite keen on 7501, getting an RISSB involved. I thought that was an efficient, effective process. And some RIMs don't do that. They'll have their reasons. Maybe they're not so engineering assurance safety issues. They might have other issues. I'll accept all of that. Is that good practice? Probably not, I think. The other important thing, and this was a bit of an eye-opener for me too, a lot of these processes are very dependent on the class of vehicles. So if, and I have been involved a little bit recently in road vehicles and track machines, and I was quite surprised at the volume of track machines that get moved around the country. And then when I discovered the bountiful information available on Equipa, I really understood this was good practice. Interestingly, of the organisations that are accredited in every state and territory, because that's the granularity of the data I had, it was these people, the ROVs, track machine owners, working in every state and jurisdiction, that were the only group that were registered in every one, not the freight operators. So I thought that was interesting. So while I say there's a lot of diversity in processes, most of them selectively nominated 7501. The vast majority of vehicles out there being certified and registered are being done so in a framework that resembles 7501 in some format or not. So I thought I was quite encouraged by that. I think that's a good standard. So here's another example of the scale and the differences that we have. So you can see there's huge, in this table, you can see there's a huge number of RIMs. You know, just in New South Wales alone, there's 57 RIMs and 85 RSOs. So I should explain, this data comes from the ONSA website, which lists out the state and the role of the RIM or the RSO. And so I've pulled this together from that. That's the best information I had. So when I was talking to one interstate freight operator, he was telling me that he had to fully utilize the wagons they wanted to, they had to register the vehicles with 7 RIMs. That's a huge amount of paperwork. And then you can imagine the frustration. And this image of this particular person I was speaking to in the RSO office was just piles of paperwork all around him. And when you look at 7 RIMs, I think he told me his fleet was about 1,500 vehicles, and each RIM had a different form, and they're from 24 data fields to 172 data fields. You can imagine the frustration in the paper wall that you're dealing with here. So no surprise to me, you know, I had some oversight on the National Rolling Stock registration project, which is seeking to capture all this paper into a database, which is definitely required, and I could see why NTC supported the approach. This one was a eye-opener for me too. So this is the number of states or territories that accredited parties are in. So in the 8 states and territories, there's 7 RIMs and RSOs that are registered in all 8. Now, when I put RIMs or RSOs, because there are organisations that are registered as both, or they're a RIM. So I'm only interested in RIMs, but because they were RIM or RSO, I put it this way. So they were all the track machine operators, the large construction companies. And then as you move down this road, then this becomes the freight guys. There's 2 that are in 7, there's 7 in 6 states, etc. So now if you can imagine you're essentially trying to move boxes around, or containers of some type around the defined interstate network, as we used to call it, to use that to reach each of the ports across Australia, assuming you're registered with ARTC, you've got at least another 5 RIMs you have to go and register your vehicles with. So that's certify and register the vehicles with. That's no little task when you've got a big fleet. Remember, you've got to re-register, and if you make changes, material changes to the vehicle, you've got to re-register them again. This is a big task. We're spending a lot of time and money on this, and it's not efficient. And I would argue because some RIMs have very low bars in terms of the engineering assurance processes, which perhaps are not as safe as we could be as well. So that brings us to the proposals in the paper for further consideration.
Just a quick one, Klaus, as you take a break on that. At that point, I want to understand a little bit more. You kind of sort of gone through the size of the task and sort of complexity around the challenges approach on this area. Are they in your research work? Did you find any good practice that it is worth talking about, whether in Australia or in internationally, some of those good practices that may be of value for us to consider in this conversation?
I thought there was a whole lot of mutual recognition from RIM to RIM on certification and registration. That was very useful, very helpful. And as I say in the proposal in the document, I referred to this as being low-hanging fruit. There's we're a long way off agreeing to 172 data fields. We've probably got a lot more than 25 data fields that we could all agree to fairly readily. I think 80% of the population agreed to about 60 data fields. So from a data fields point of view, I think there's quite easy to capture a whole lot of information that we could share amongst the RIMs and our RSOs, so that they're not reproducing documents. The other one was that I think if we clarified that certification is for the dynamic performance of the vehicle rather than all the crashworthiness and everything else that we're currently, 80% of the design and construction certification is really what I would call boilerplate design issues. What I'm really concerned about as a RIM is, are you going to damage my track? And can your vehicle steer correctly over my network, given my infrastructure standards. So if you boil it down to that, the task that the RIM needs to be involved with becomes like 1/5, 1/8 of the certification process that some people are doing currently.
A couple of questions from a previous slide that has come through, Klaus, is around the roles and responsibilities, and you've highlighted a few roles and responsibilities there. The question was around designers, manufacturers, OEMs. Do they have a role to play, or how does that interplay into this conversation?
I see them as essentially working with the ICP and the RSO to self-certify the vehicle to the non-performance engineering standards.
Okay. Cool.
You know, we've got a regulator who oversees the safety management system, and you know, if personally, if I was an RSO and a RIM said to me, you know, what are your processes, I'd be saying, yeah, here's my safety management system, here is how I credit the documents, and I'd go from there, have the discussion. And if the, you know, and because it's safety, I'd be open to the discussion about any concerns the RIM had with the aspects that interact with his railway.
Thanks, Klaus. I'll let you continue the conclusion proposal page.
Thank you. How are we going for time, Sir? I have no clock in front of me here.
That's okay. It's 42 minutes in, so yeah, you're good on time.
Thank you. So the proposal for further discussion is, and I saw this as an easy one, is forms and processes should be normalized and digitized. That would completely reduce the duplication of quadruplication of effort. It would greatly improve the RSO and the RIM paperwork, paper war that's going on currently. And clearly the NRSR is the basis for that, and should be ramped up. Common RIM requirements can be standardized. So I think if we got the right people in the room with the technical expertise, we could go through the RIM requirements and very quickly identify those that are not controversial and cause no anxiety. And why wouldn't we just incorporate those straight up front and get an early win on this, and then continue to work through what the various roles are, and reduce the certification requirements with the RIMs to the interface performance requirements. So so what I'm basically saying there is, you know, you'd start with doing the National Rolling Stock registration process as we have it scoped today. But where you go to is where you're certifying the requirements for performance requirements only. And the RSO would keep the self-certification documents to himself. There would be no, I can't see any value in them being provided beyond the development of the performance requirements. But, you know, again, we'll have more discussion on this, I'm sure. Yeah, I think there's a requirement for AS 7501 Mark II, or Part 2, the Common Registration Interface Standards. There is a list of registration data fields, and it was interesting to review those because they didn't really relate very well to the RIM data fields that I had provided to me from the 7 stakeholders, 7 RIMs that I talked to. So I think there is definitely a need for further work on the common registration requirements, and I said that's been quite an easy task to do too. And then this is the important nuance in the self-certification, is the network-specific differences are then handled on a risk basis. So, you know, as a RIM, I'm aware better than anyone about where my infrastructure, what my infrastructure standards are, and what the performance of the trains across that network are. They, if the certification doesn't cover those interfaces very well, or doesn't explain them very well, then they should be redone on a risk basis, that's in everyone's interest to do that. That's a safety concern. And this last one might be considered a bit controversial, and I did struggle with it as an ex-operator. There should be regulation for the use of and the mutual recognition of certification and registration standards. So that is not that there would be regulations stating what the registration standard is or what the certification standard is, but that there should be mutual recognition of the certification and registration standards. And then I can hear people saying, yeah, well, what's the mutual recognition standard? Well, in the first case, it would be 7501 and variations of the theme on that. But ultimately, because it's risk-based, it needs to be a RIM network-specific, rolling stock specific risk assessment that defines the requirements for certification and registration. And that's where I better stop. Thanks, Sudha.
Sorry. Thanks, Klaus. A couple of clarification points. You raised this concept of a self-certification of rolling stock. And what do you see are some of the challenges or impacts for the key stakeholders involved in this concept of a self-certification?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that I'm just trying to stop sharing here. My mouse is not cooperating. Here we go. Yeah, the first part of that is everyone's got to agree what their roles are or are not, and that's already defined for us by our accreditation. So I think we go back to our accreditation and have a look at and see what we're actually accredited for, and then we look at our rail safety interface agreements, and then we proceed from that basis. Okay, now let's have a discussion about where we're interfacing and what assurances we give each other that we're and the format of those assurances. Yeah, that's the first step.
Thanks, Klaus. The other one question is just a bit more clarification on the network-specific differences that are then handled on a risk basis. How do you see this practically work? Like, how do you see this practically work itself out?
Well, just as we do now, if I go to certify or register a vehicle in the network, it's not called a safety case, but I need to put an engineering assurance case up, and the first part of that is a risk assessment. So in that risk assessment, if I follow the standard, I've got to get the stakeholders involved. Well, who's the key stakeholder here? It's the RIM. Yeah. So that's the place where it starts. That's where that interface coordination, cooperation, and coordination occurs through that joint risk assessment.
Very good. Let me pick out a couple of questions that are coming through. Some of them for me, which I'll address shortly. Yep. Let's get through some of your questions. I'm involved in a registration of vehicles. There's been an important point that's been touched with regards to upon is the difference between above and below rail. For example, as far as the third party goes, we only require minimum certification dealing with interface issues only, with the RSO responsible for all above rail issues. In other words, important to divide certification registration into two different responsibilities. Do you see that as really clearly dividing as two different responsibilities?
So I didn't quite get the question. Perhaps you could.
The question is,
summarize it for me.
Yeah, with what you have explained, some entities do only look at interface issues as far as registration is concerned.
I agree with that. They do. That's true. Yep.
Yep. So you do see them as two different responsibilities. Okay, cool.
Yep. Yep. I think particularly, if I go to the tracked vehicle guys, the RIMS are being very practical about the interfaces. So of course, it's a completely different profile, and its engineering interface is very different, but the principle is there, definitely. So the RIMS, a lot of the RIMS are already doing this, just not for your freight trains or your passenger trains.
There is a couple of questions, fairly lengthy questions here with regards to, we've talked about the regulation in the certificate and registration of rolling stock with regards to the railway and the railway safety and safety assurance and technical assurance, engineering assurance. But then there are other interfaces that are there with maybe state jurisdictions or environmental protection agencies, or EPA, or other mechanism. So yeah, but wondering, does that enter into this discussion at all, or it's a sort of a separate thing that you kind of talk about?
I think personally, I think it's a separate topic, but I can understand the question being asked, and my impression is that it's very state specific. So I don't think there's a universal answer, and quite frankly, they are quite a different group and diverse group of regulators dealing with those issues. I think it's a different topic. Gee, sounds off, Suda.
Thanks, Klaus. With the industry moving towards net zero and the different technologies coming in place and different fuel sources coming in place, the interface conversations may be a lot higher than what it was previously. Is it a fair statement to make with regards to this point of registration and certification?
Look, I know there are hydrogen trains and there are battery electric trains coming, and certainly increasingly seen on networks other than our own. I don't really see the accreditation distinguishing between new technologies and old technologies at this stage. But again, where do you start with your engineering assurance process and your operational assurance? You do a risk assessment, and the stakeholders will be in the room. And if you identify new interfaces that need to be managed, that's the place to do it. I hope they're doing that now.
Thanks, Klaus. A couple of questions for me around the RISSB work and how the interaction that takes place with the work that NTC is covering. Look, we, as you are aware, this work, the registration system, it was sponsored by NTC and the state governments to develop that. So we believe that the process has been, in the work that we do is complementary to NTC. Obviously, NTC has a reform agenda around it, and they will be looking at policy changes. They will be looking at legislative changes that needs to enact various activity. This is more from a practical point of view. RISSB's work is really around the practically how some of these things work out, and looking at the details and the technical aspects of it to kind of draw out. So from RISSB's perspective, the work that NTC does and the work that RISSB does are really, really complementary, and that's how we see it. So hope that answers the question. And I think we have covered most of the questions, Klaus. We will leave it there. Thanks so much, Klaus. I appreciate you taking the time to sort of present on your findings. The white paper would be released during this week, and that will be available for downloads for further details on the white paper that probably will explain some of the questions that have been raised here and may probably give you a bit more detail with regards to the Streamlining a Rolling Register white paper. So that will come out during the week, so watch out for that. If you've got any specific questions around what we do or more further information that you need on this paper or any other activity that RISSB does, don't hesitate to put a note down, email us at info@rissb.com.au. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and hope you have a good afternoon. Cheers.